Hello, Philippines, and welcome to the World News Jam. My name is Lecain. We're always here on the RJTV channel 224 on Sky Cable right here in Manila, and DZRJ Radio 810 AM on your radio dial. Also Facebook and YouTube. We discuss what I think are the most interesting stories going on in the world this week. This week, the U.S. Vice President trip to the Philippines. Gun violence in the gay nightclub in the United States. How did Qatar get to do the World Cup? Also protests in Iran, the oldest baby in the world, and of course, some money news. So thank you so much for joining us right here tonight. So let's take a dive into this week's news pool. Here we go. Well, whose rocket is going where? A few weeks ago, it was North Korea test-firing rockets into the upper atmosphere and then seeing where they land. And now it's China. There's some pieces of Chinese rockets falling into the ocean, and sometimes it's in the Philippine Ocean. Remember when you accidentally kick your ball into the neighbor's yard and the neighbor says, "It's in my yard, it's my ball now." Of course, they would eventually throw it back to you. But what you couldn't do was jump over the fence, point your military cannons at them, and forcibly take your ball back. Anyway, Chinese rocket fell from the sky and landed in the Philippine waters, so the Philippines went out to check it out. Now, the Philippines has been picking up other debris in this area over the past few weeks. So from what I understand, the Philippine Navy was towing this rocket debris when a Chinese Coast Guard ship blocked them and confiscated the piece of rocket. The word used was forcibly retrieved. Now, a spokesman for the Chinese Foreign Affairs said that this was an incident. However, the Chinese didn't just take the rocket piece. There was a mutual understanding, a friendly negotiation between the two sides. The Philippines openly returned the debris, and the Chinese vessel thanked them. I'm sure the giant cannons on the Chinese ship didn't play a part. Like I said, this is not the first time that pieces of Chinese rockets have ended up in the Philippine waters. NASA has accused China multiple times of allowing rocket stages just to fall uncontrollably back into the Earth's atmosphere as debris fell all over the Indian territorial waters. Now, since then, the Philippines has requested an explanation on why the Chinese Coast Guard vessel seized debris that was clearly in Philippine waters. Why did the Chinese boat deploy an inflatable boat and then cut the rope of the debris being towed by the Philippines? Now, if this was just one incident, then maybe the Philippines might just overlook it, but it's not. Since the new administration came in on July 1st, there have been 52 protests since the Chinese stating illegal presence and incursions in the Philippine regional area. Now, is China really going to care about these protests? I mean, it's a chihuahua barking at a gorilla. But what if the chihuahua had a hunter standing behind it with a really big gun pointing at the gorilla? In walks Kamala Harris, the Vice President of the United States, who was on her way to the Philippines anyway to have a talk with the president. This is the first time a meeting was set in the country with the Philippine president and a U.S. official at this level. The topic of conversation is China. Speaking on the Philippine patrol ship, Harris said that we must stand up for the principles such as a respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity and unimpeded law of commerce and the peaceful resolution of disputes. That when the international rules-based order is threatened somewhere, it is threatened everywhere. In other words, Philippines, the U.S. is here, and we will protect you from guerrillas. It wasn't that long ago when the previous Philippine president said, "Thanks, but no thanks. We really don't need the U.S. anymore because we have new friends." But that waver in Philippine-U.S. relations seems to be over now. In a meeting with the current president, Harris reiterated that the U.S. support for the 1951 Mutual Defense Treaty, that any attack on the Philippines would, especially in the South China Sea, be answered by the U.S. But the real news is in this meeting was the $66.5 million that the U.S. would be spending to bring the U.S. military back to the Philippines. Now, the U.S. coming back to the Philippines will not only be about the military, but also will allow the U.S. to better respond to disaster relief and humanitarian assistance. In fact, Harris spent a lot of time talking about non-military assistance, including climate change and coming of food and energy crisis, and an agreement on the critically mined supply chains and the geothermal power project in Mindanao. There was even talk about the policy of the U.S. exporting nuclear equipment and materials to developing nuclear energy in the Philippines. This meeting seems to have marked an end to the stagnant relationship between the U.S. and the Philippines, and seems to be opening new doors to how the U.S. and Philippines will work closely together moving forward into the unpredictable future. As of now, we don't have an idea about what will be in a year from now or even 10 years from now. We never thought there'd be another major war, but there it was. When we didn't see a pandemic coming, but, well, it came. The U.S. needs the Philippines just as much as the Philippines needs the U.S. The Philippines is about to go through a very hard time, according to economists. The wave of economic hardships is going to get worse before it gets better in the Philippines. The Philippines is not always going to be able to rely on imports. The U.S. says that they will play a role in seeing that the Philippines has a sustainable agricultural system in place. The U.S. is putting up to $20 million to do this. So the U.S. wants to help in the expansion of communication networks in the Philippines. It involves satellite service to all areas of the country. This is alongside bringing back the security of the military. Now, most likely this will involve the U.S. setting back up in Subic. Supposedly the work on the new bases will begin in 2023. Now, of course, many people might not be so thrilled of the idea of the U.S. setting up a permanent base again, but as long as those military boys behave themselves and don't do crazy things, this is going to be very beneficial to the Philippines. First of all, it will enhance the Philippine Armed Forces in the technology and equipment, readiness. Like I said, we don't know what's coming in the future. Maybe nothing military-wise. Maybe the U.S. will help another country and the Philippines will be there ready to assist. I can think of a whole host of things that might happen, from North Korea to Taiwan to an attack from Russia. You know, we were all wondering what the relationship might be going forward, but so far it looks like it's going in the right direction. And this is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ. Moving forward onto our next subject, dangerous countries. Places where you can get yourself killed. Iraq, Somalia, Honduras, some even say the Philippines. But what's the most dangerous country on earth? Where people die every day from someone shooting them with a gun. Where most of the country has a gun, or 2, or 10. Where the person being shot is a man, a woman, a Muslim, a Christian, Jew, black, white, Asian, gay, a child, anyone. Where would that be? Would you guess the U.S.? More shootings happening right now in the U.S. than anywhere else in the world. Now, that can't be true, can it? Not in the U.S. But let's ask the obvious question as to why. Why is the U.S. all of a sudden beating out everyone for being the best place to get yourself killed? It is from the dangerous immigrants running across the Mexican border, or is it the Chinese gangs, or it's the blacks with all their crime and drug? I mean, most of the crime is committed by blacks, right? That's what they say. Well, no, not exactly. In fact, without doing any research and just watching the TV, I can safely say that most of the gun violence, mass shootings you see in the U.S. is coming from white male Americans. And much of the reason for that is coming from the polarization of politics over the last few years, the fear that someone is trying to change your way of life, or somehow they are going to be hurting the children. We must save the children. There's a danger in the U.S. and it's coming after our children. They're going to radicalize our kids and turn them into one of them, into one of those ungodlies, into one of those homosexuals. I hear people on TV saying those Democrats are letting the gays run around the country. I mean, shouldn't it be illegal? I mean, they're after our kids. We need to fear them. I mean, it's true, especially in politics. Gay people are a great way to get people fired up about something. There was a commercial that came out recently in Georgia during the Senate runoff where Herschel Walker, the Trump-backed football star running for the Senate, said something interesting. In the commercial, there's a female swimmer that said her hopes and dreams of being number one, the best swimmer in college, were crushed because of a trans swimmer that beat her. Now, I'm the first one to say that trans athletes have an unfair advantage. However, what that commercial did was get people fired up about trans people, get people mad at trans people for stealing this poor girl's dreams. But in reality, they should be mad at the NCAA for making such a rule. But it leads to the idea that trans people and gay people are somehow ruining the U.S. society, that the movies and TV shows that are openly showing gay and trans people should be removed from the eyes of our children. The teachers that help children who are trying to figure out their identity should be fired. And of course, any teachers that are trans should be immediately removed. Also, that any medical care for trans people should be illegal. Sexual reassignment should be outlawed. The rep from Colorado, Lauren Beaupart, said that drag queens should be not allowed to be around our children, that somehow they are unchristian. Just let me point out that most sexual assaults on children in the U.S. are perpetuated by white Christian conservative men. Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we have spoken about a bit before here on the show, the congresswoman from Georgia, said that Gay Pride Month should be removed from the calendar before the gays and trans people are able to take over our country. She even suggested that the gunman in Uvalde, Texas, was a cross-dressing trans there to kill the children, even though he simply wore a dress to hide his escape. That kind of sex education involving the explanation of homosexuality should be removed from schools. She said that in 150 years, the gays will have indoctrinated the entire country to their way of life, so we should fear them. Now, none of this matters if it's true or not. Clearly gets people of the conservative Christian right-wing political party all fired up. And it gets people to vote for you because you will save them from these ungodly people. This week in Colorado, a gay nightclub was having a drag queen show. Club Q, as it's called, is a place where gays and trans people have long been able to go to feel safe and be themselves. There was a drag queen show that evening that led up to Transgender Day of Remembrance, which is a day to remember the 49 people shot and killed in the gay nightclub in Orlando several years before. However, no one would have ever thought that something like that would happen in this nightclub. The club prided itself on putting on shows for all ages and being a place that gays and straights and trans people could come and enjoy themselves, where the outside world of cruelty and discrimination was not welcome. But that night, that world was able to gain entrance as a 22-year-old white man entered the club with a military assault rifle. Guess you can imagine what's going to come next. When the gunshots rang out, many people thought it was just part of the show, when all of a sudden it wasn't. As he fired his weapon over and over into the crowd, glass was breaking everywhere and people started screaming. And in the end, 53 people lay wounded on the floor and 5 were killed. The reason it was only 5 was because in the crowd that night there was an ex-Army officer who was trained in hand-to-hand combat. He rushed the man and alleviated him of his weapon and beat him up pretty badly. The Army veteran's family was there with him, and his daughter's boyfriend was one of those that was killed. Turns out the man with the gun had a record of violence, from felony menacing, first-degree kidnapping, to making a bomb threat. Now, you might think that this kind of background might stop this guy from being able to acquire an assault rifle. However, since the ban on assault weapons was lifted in the U.S., being able to acquire such weapons has become very easy. By the way, as I have pointed out on the show before, during the government's ban on assault weapons, the number of mass shootings went way down, and when the ban was lifted, it went way up. In fact, in the past year, the shootings involving multiple injuries and death happen 2 times per day in the U.S. But the point here is not the obvious problems with the easiness of getting a weapon in the U.S. The issue is the fact that when a politician of a particular party says something such as you need to fear certain types of people in our society, it can have a dangerous, lasting effect on the people that are listening to them. For example, when all the speeches during the Trump era started coming out about dangerous Mexicans, well, what happened was there was a mass shooting in El Paso in which 23 mostly Hispanic people were killed. When there was the fear that started being perpetuated about Asians, well, there was a mass shooting in Georgia in which 6 Asian women were killed. Then there were 3 shootings as Asian-owned businesses in Texas. Then 11 Jews were killed in a synagogue in Pittsburgh. Then Muslims were killed in New Mexico. And of course, the gay nightclub in Orlando in which 49 people were killed. Yes, it's true that if the gun laws in the U.S. would change, then many of these mass shootings probably would not happen. But really, much of the reason these types of mass shootings are happening in the first place is because of what many politicians are saying. I mean, talking about the economy and the jobs reports are important, but what really gets people to come out and vote is fear. Nothing gets people more excited than talking about someone that is not you, someone that looks different, has a different religion, has a different lifestyle, someone that's going to push you out, that's going to make a change in your country, and we don't like change. Now, a lot of the people listening to this kind of hate and fear mongering will vote for politicians, they're the ones that are saying it, because they don't want anybody else in the country but them. And some come together and create a rally and chant, "The Jews will not replace us." But eventually, someone is going to fill themselves with so much fear and hate about someone taking over the country that they will go and buy themselves a military-style weapon and walk into a gay nightclub in Colorado and kill 5 people and injure 25. So what is the most dangerous country in the world these days? Many of you are saying that I'm kind of crazy for suggesting it's the U.S., but after you do the numbers, well, you might be horribly surprised. And this is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ and RJTV. So let's move over to sports. Are there any good sporting events going on in the world right now? Well, the World Cup is going on. It's pretty big, I guess. In fact, in the last World Cup, more people watched it at any one time than any other sporting event ever, including the Olympics. 1.3 billion people tuned in to watch the finals. The cumulative viewership in the matches in 2006 was 26.29 billion people. Football, or soccer as they call it in the U.S., is without a doubt the most popular sport in the world. First of all, it's really the simplest sport ever invented. All you need is a ball and a large open area and something to make a goal. No poles or complicated uniforms or helmets or rules. Just kick the ball into the goal. It's played all over the world because it's so simple that you can start players at very young ages. This is why there is interest all over in the World Cup, from very young to very old. Like the Olympics, it's done every 4 years, and teams can qualify for the event in the 3 years leading up to it. Now, the group that oversees the World Cup is known as FIFA. FIFA was founded in 1908 and was created to arrange football matches between international countries. And the first World Cup was played in 1930 in Uruguay, in which 13 nations from around the world took part. Now, that was later increased to 24 teams in 1982, 32 teams in 1998, and coming in 2026, it'll be 48 teams. So it is growing and growing as the popularity of the sport continues to blossom. But when you have a sporting event like the World Cup that is this big, sometimes the entire world will see that there's definitely going to be some politics going on, maybe even some corruption. Obviously, whoever hosted the World Cup is going to be at the center stage of the world. I mean, think about it. Things that gets the world to notice you are a war, the Olympics, and the World Cup. So who gets to host the event gets to wield a power like no other. But how does FIFA really decide who gets to be the one who gets to be the most watched show in the world? Okay, well, first of all, FIFA is divided into 6 parts: North America, South America, Africa, Europe, Asia, and the Oceanic region. Now, there are representatives from each of those parts that will come together and vote for who will get to host the World Cup. I guess you might say these 24 people are some of the most powerful people in sports, because each of these votes is literally worth billions and billions of dollars to the host country. And while FIFA is the governing body over the massively prestigious and monumental event, they are also known as one of the most corrupt sports associations to ever exist in the world. Sorry. Now, there have been allegations of corruption for decades. However, most recently, it has spilled onto the screens of the Western media. Bribes equaling $150 million, money laundering, racketeering, wire fraud, a 47-count indictment. So this is becoming one of the main focuses in this year's World Cup. Now, currently, the World Cup is taking place in Qatar. However, the actual picking of Qatar happened back in 2010, which at the time kind of came as a shock to many. I mean, they only have 3 million people in the whole country, and only 313,000 are actual citizens. And they are a little tiny Arab country that were very poor. The main source of income there was pearl diving. That is, until they discovered that they have lots of oil, and they were sitting on top of the largest natural gas reserve in the world. So basically, Qatar has 3 things. They have gas, they have oil, and they have money. And had no infrastructure for a large sporting event, and it's crazy hot there. But they do have money, and that was enough to win them the World Cup over countries like the U.S., Australia, Japan, South Korea. Actually, in the end, it came down to the U.S. or Qatar. They were the final 2. The U.S., which met all the criteria, and Qatar, which almost met none of the criteria. So how did the least most pickable place get picked for the World Cup? Was money the reason? Well, it does take a lot of money to put on a World Cup. In the last few World Cups, countries have spent more than $10 billion on the event. Russia even spent $14 billion on the World Cup. I mean, that's a crazy amount of money to invest in a sporting event. But Russia already had a stadium, a place. They were already much experienced in putting on huge events. Qatar started out with 0. They had nothing except money, an endless, infinite supply of money. So when you're a tiny country with nothing to offer really, except you have money, well, sometimes that might blind people. I was going to tell you this later. However, according to the reports coming out from FIFA, Qatar has spent on the World Cup so far, are you sitting down? $220 billion. Just to put that into perspective, that is a little more than half of the entire gross domestic product of the Philippines. But the Philippines has over 111 million people. Qatar only has 313,000 actual citizens. So did Qatar buy the World Cup? That's a question many are asking now because, like I said, there's only a few million people there, most of which are expats. But of that small population, the actual citizens are super rich and walk around with jewelry and their pet tigers and their Maseratis. So again, how did this country with so few people who haven't really put on a massive event like this get to the point that where we are today with these huge, beautiful stadiums? To answer that, we have to go back to how they got the 14 of 24 people in FIFA to vote for them. Now, first of all, there are certain parameters that a country must meet in order to consider for the World Cup. As I've explained, Qatar ranked last on the list as far as any of these. The weather, the infrastructure, the fact that almost no one in Qatar even plays football. I mean, they're not the ideal choice. However, there was a man on the FIFA executive committee named Mohammed bin Hamad. He's a Qatarian. So we can assume, well, he voted for Qatar. So there's one vote. Anyway, this guy seems to be the key factor in how everyone was able to overlook some of the faults of Qatar. So let's take a look at who might have voted for Qatar. First up was the rep from Trinidad. Now, according to the court records, just before the vote, bin Hamad deposited $450,000 into that guy's bank account. Later added some extra, equaling $1.6 million. Okay, that seems pretty cut and dry. Next are the 3 reps from South America. Currently, they are all under indictment for receiving money from Qatar in order to vote for Qatar. On a side note, after the vote, 2 of them have died, leading up to their court cases against them. Next up are the 4 guys from Africa. Now, before the vote, they were having their annual meeting. Now, during that time, the Qatar bid team, the group that lobbies for Qatar, met with 3 of those reps. According to the testimony of the translator in that meeting, the Qatarians offered each of them $1.5 million to vote for Qatar. Now, later, that translator eventually went back on her statement, said that she lied. However, when the FBI paid her a visit, she said that she was pressured to say that she made the whole thing up and that the bribes from Qatar really did happen. That translator has said that she now has to look over her shoulder for the rest of her life. Also, later, one of those guys was caught on camera negotiating an $800,000 payoff for his vote. Because of that media attention, he was later disqualified. And the rep from the Oceanic region was also caught on camera taking a bribe from Qatar as he was disqualified. So now let's move over to Asia and the rep from Thailand. This is interesting. At the time of the vote, Thailand was trying to negotiate an energy deal with Qatar, nothing to do with the sporting event. Thailand was just trying to get a cheaper price for its natural gas. Now, during this meeting between the officials of Qatar to negotiate this deal, the FIFA rep for Thailand was there too. So why is one of the voting members of the World Cup in a meeting for natural gas? Okay, well, there was a leaked email between the Qatar gas guy and the FIFA rep who, it turns out, they were both working together, and it was all arranged by Mohammed bin Hamad. Remember that guy from Qatar? Then there are those European reps that sold his family's land to Qatar after the vote for way over the asking price, and another rep whose son was given a job in Qatar just after the vote. But nothing beats the head of the European region of the French rep who got called to have lunch with the French president just 1 week before the final vote. Now, it was well known that this guy was planning to vote for the U.S. for the World Cup. It was no secret. However, when he got to the meeting, not only was the French president there, but also the 2 most powerful people in Qatar, the prime minister and the current emir of Qatar. So, in this room, you have the French president, who at the time was in extreme trouble as the 2008 financial meltdown had just happened, the 2 richest, most powerful men in Qatar, and the guy who was about to vote on the World Cup, who has already stated that he was voting for the U.S. In this meeting, according to the sources, the French president flat out told the French FIFA rep to change his vote to Qatar. So what do you think happened? Well, after the vote, Qatar up and bought a French football team that was currently in major financial trouble. That team turned out to be the favorite team of the French president. Then Qatar buys 50 giant Airbus planes from France, worth $18 billion. Maybe they were going to buy them anyway. I'm just saying. Later on in the news conference, the French FIFA rep said that he switched his vote from the U.S. to Qatar after the pressure at that meeting. In the end, Qatar got 14 votes and the U.S. got 8 with 2 disqualifications. So does this show us how corrupt Qatar is, or rather did they just take advantage of a situation that was open to them? That FIFA is so riddled with representatives that will, for around $1.5 million, quite easily and openly vote for your country for the World Cup? I mean, this is going to boost Qatar on the world stage now and probably over the next few decades. But what does this mean for the future of the most popular sport in the world? Can Arab states with little to no sports programs, with authoritarian, brutal regimes, simply just pay off the people who are voting? I mean, I got nothing against Qatar, but they are an authoritarian regime, very well known for being anti-gay. In fact, it's illegal in the country to be gay. Of course, many people are protesting this fact, even the players, but currently FIFA has said that they will penalize any team that protests the Qatarian law, especially in the wearing of armbands of any kind that represent or promotes a gay lifestyle. And what about all the stories coming out now about how Qatar built their World Cup stadiums? They brought in all these overseas workers from Bangladesh and India, Nepal, and the Philippines. 50 died during the building that we know of, and 500 were seriously injured, while 37,600 were injured but not so seriously. Amnesty International has stated that workers that were brought there to build the stadium did not get the money they were promised and had to pay huge recruitment fees and had their passports confiscated until the work was completed. The government had said that they fixed this issue in 2017, but as of 2021, many of the workers still suffer from illegal wage deductions and having to work in extreme heat and forced to live in horrible conditions. Now, most of this is all documented through videos and testimony. However, FIFA has sent out a letter to all the teams telling them to not talk about this and just focus on the game. Of course, many teams understand FIFA's position. However, they did not stop them from speaking out against wearing their uniforms with codes to symbolize the mistreatment of workers and the human rights abuses in Qatar. So even though the football games have been very exciting, and believe me, they have been, but as you watch the games, there is still that cloud that just won't seem to go away, knowing how the World Cup came to be in Qatar. I'll watch it because it's shaping up to be exciting, but just wondering if this is going to be the future of the World Cup, where the corruption leading up to the games is almost as interesting as the game itself. And this is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam. Remember we spoke about what's going on in Iran a few weeks ago? A young Kurdish girl named Mahsa Amini was riding in her car with some family members when the car was stopped by the morality police. This is the arm of the police in Iran that checks to make sure that you are dressed properly and that you are not saying anything that's incorrect. Well, they stopped the 22-year-old because some of her hair had come out from under her hijab, which is against one of the religious laws there. They removed her from the car, put her in a van, and beat her with police sticks. Many people saw it, including her family. Well, she slipped into a coma, and a few days later, she died. The autopsy said she died of a heart attack. However, the family and just about everyone else says it was because of the brutal beating given to her by the police. Now, the government has said that this girl did not die at the hands of the police. However, the 22-year-old died of natural causes in the hospital after she was arrested. They believe the current protests in Iran are because of the ones that are because of this girl death has made entirely have been created by the Western media, who have made baseless and fallacious lies about Iran, that all the people that have been dying recently are the responsibility of the Western regime. Now, these protests currently going on around in Iran are beyond belief. In a country where protests are against the government's laws and are strictly prohibited, and the sentence from protesting the government is usually death. Even so, tens of thousands of people are protesting. Most of them are women, many times burning their hijabs in public. As of now, 300 people, more or less, have lost their lives in the protests, including 40 children. According to some reports, as many as 15,000 people have been sentenced to death. However, that number is disputed. According to the Iranian government, they have just sentenced one person to death for the act of corruption on earth and 4 others for holding a knife and taking a role as a leader of unrest. But most have been sentenced to prison, which is where our story begins this week. So as the Iranian government fires back at the U.S. for killing the women in Afghanistan with their bombs and killing the women of Palestine via the hands of the U.S.-supported Israelis, and the killing of women in Yemen as a result of starving them to death with sanction-imposed famine, the Western media has uncovered something new about the women of Iran during the civil unrest. Women in Iran, of course, are not equal footing as the same as men. They must wear a hijab, and they must ask permission to leave the home or drive a car or go to school. These are not that easy for women. So this protest that women are doing there is meaning a lot to the plight of their life in Iran. It's basically taking your own life in your hands to be part of such a protest. The slogan is Women, Life, Freedom, and it's being reverberated throughout the country. But the women involved in this protest are being categorized as loose women, women under the influence of Western government, women that are not acting in accordance with God. But there are stories coming out of Iran that are truly ungodly. Things going on in Iran that's coming from the Iranian security forces. Right now, almost no media is being allowed in the country, and the internet is being switched off sometimes without warning, and a lot of that has to do with what's happening to the women protesters. The security forces will scope out who to grab, and they will grab them and take them to the detention center. Sometimes they will even scour the web looking for women posting what they see is against the morality law there. For example, one 20-year-old girl who was seen as this was picked up and taken in as a leader to one of the riots. After a time in jail, she was rushed to the local hospital for a digestive disorder. She was bleeding from a place that you don't want to be bleeding from. When the doctors took a look at her, they realized right away this was no stomach issue. This girl was shaking uncontrollably and was bleeding due to a brutal rape. When one of the doctors said, this girl has been raped, one of the dog guards said that, well, that must have happened before she was brought to the jail. The girl's head had been shaved. She was badly bruised and trembling. The security guards told the doctors they cannot speak to her, they can only treat her. I mean, she was semi-conscious anyway. So after the treatment, she was removed and no one has seen her since. This is not the only incident that has been reported. There are several cases of rape and torture currently coming out of Iran, but details are hard to find. The idea is that guards are raping girls as a deterrent for other girls who might want to protest. Some of the women have said that they were filmed while being raped and then threatened that if they told anyone, the videos would go public and they would be shamed. There are eyewitness accounts of women being grabbed from protests and raped right there in the street and then threatened with retaliation. There are videos emerging of commanders telling the forces to be rough on the women when arresting them. There are accounts of women explaining their arrest of being electrically shocked by a stun gun multiple times and then tied up and kicked. One of the issues in Iran now is that the younger girls are more fearless than they ever were before. One of the young girls said she was taken to a police station where they were not allowed to go to the bathroom. They were not given any food. When they started yelling, they were told that if they did not be quiet, that each would be raped one by one. In another jail that was packed with like 80 women in one cell, someone started to complain. The female guard said that she's going to call in one of her male guards to have sex with the girl if she wasn't going to be quiet. This is the new way of scaring people into stopping this uprising, which is in its second month already now. Actresses and other famous people are now being arrested, which is gaining more and more attention by the media. How much longer can this go on before they put everyone in jail in Iran, or the government agrees to back down, or there's civil war? I highly doubt the last one, because Iranian security forces are very well equipped and the protesters are not. But the rest of the world is watching all of this unfold, and eventually someone's going to react to help the women of Iran. And when that does happen, I fear for the lives of all those young women there. This is Eric Lecain here on the World Jews Jam on DZRJ Radio. Let's get to some science. So today, what was going on 30 years ago in 1992? Well, let's see. Bill Clinton was being voted in as the 42nd president of the United States. Elvis Presley was put on the postage stamp. Whitney Houston, I Will Always Love You, hit number 1. Oh, the Chicago Bulls won their second championship. And Home Alone 2 was released. And an anonymous couple using in vitro fertilization had their embryos frozen 30 years ago this week. In other words, they had a couple of their extra eggs frozen until maybe they could use them at a later date. If a couple goes through the process of in vitro fertilization, there will be some extra eggs. They can donate them to infertile couples. They can donate them to science, or they can freeze them in tiny straws at 200 degrees below 0 Celsius in nitrogen and then try to use them again later. Well, the couple decided to donate them to another couple, and in doing so, the eggs were shipped from the lab in the West Coast to the National Embryo Donation Center in Knoxville, Tennessee. And this is where Rachel and Philip come into the picture. They were around 5 years old when those embryos were put into the freezer, but now they are the only ones to use them to have a baby. Now, this process is called embryo adoption. Now, it's not exactly adoption, but the child that will be born will not be the genetic offspring of the parents. Slightly complicated in this idea of the baby donor, the woman giving birth, who is the real mother. In the legal sense, the embryos are donated, so the child is the legal child of the birth mother. This also opens a way for some parents who may not have the money to go through in vitro procedures to still have a birth child. The Ridgway couple said that they went to the embryo center. They never had the idea of breaking a record, of having the oldest embryo to go to term. They just wanted the eggs that had waited the longest to be born. So they asked for the category of eggs that were sitting in the freezer the longest time. Now, when you go into the center to pick up your embryo, you actually have a lot of choices. You can see the parents' ethnicity, their height, their weight, their health history, education, occupation, their favorite movies, their favorite music. In some cases, you can even see a picture of the parents and their other children. This is great, right? You can be short and dumb and ugly, but your kids can be tall and beautiful and smart, like classical music and Tom Cruise movies. Now, the Ridgways had the idea to get the children that had been there longer than anyone else. So, to get the eggs that basically no one else wants, which is very commendable, I have to say. A little strange. Give me your oldest eggs, please. So they decided to thaw out 5 eggs and then choose. 2 of the eggs, they didn't make it through the thaw stage, so they had to be thrown out, but 3 were good. Now, the doctor said that they wanted to transfer one embryo at a time. Basically, try one out and see if it took, and if not, then they had 2 more chances. They don't like to put in more than one because then there's a possibility of multiple births, and multiple births in this procedure can be dangerous for the mother and for the babies. Twins, triplets tend to be born very early and have a higher chance of developing cerebral palsy, autism, or even be stillborn. But the mother, Rachel, wanted all 3 at once. Something about it being God's plan. They tried to get her to do only 2, but in the end, they used all 3 of the embryos. So she said when she saw the picture of all 3 embryos, she didn't have the heart to leave one of them out. Now, there's only a 25-40% chance that frozen embryos will result in a live birth. And remember, these have been frozen for 30 years. Now, let me say that in this process, time does not stop completely in the timeline of life. Once the egg is fertilized, it continues to grow. However, putting them in a frozen nitrogen basically stops the egg in time. It's described as like Rip Van Winkle's story, where the man goes to sleep and wakes up decades later, however, never knew he was asleep. In fact, experts in this matter, more about the age of the donor and the time that the egg was frozen. For instance, it's 25 years when it donates the eggs, much higher chance of survival than, say, a 25-year-old woman than, say, a 34-year-old woman, which was the actual age of the woman who was donating the eggs. Well, in the end, 2 of the embryos did survive the procedure and begin to grow. Both eggs were split from the same cell, so they would definitely be twins. Well, the pregnancy went very well, and the twins were born, a boy and a girl, Lydia and Timothy. They were theoretically the oldest babies ever born, each being 30 years old on the day of their birth. This breaks the old record of Molly Gibson, who was born 27 years after her conception. Molly had actually taken the record from her sister, who was born 24 years after being frozen. Now, of course, I have to ask, if you can stop life at the embryonic stage and then restart it 30 years later, could we do that to a living, breathing person? Well, basically freezing them and then waking them up 100 years later. Well, I decided to find this out, and the answer is currently no. With an egg, you can freeze it instantly, and there aren't enough cells to damage. However, with a living, breathing person with blood and organs, you can't freeze it fast enough to not rupture all the cells. The body would be destroyed during the freezing process. The brain simply could not survive such a procedure. Will it be possible in the future? Most experts say probably not. But, 30 or maybe 50 years ago, having a camera, phone, messaging device, computer in your pocket was kind of a crazy thought too. Now, I do want to point out that in 2019, doctors were able to put a human in a kind of suspended animation. This is where they can pump ice-cold saline into the person's bloodstream. The brain is at that point no longer functioning. Supposedly, they can keep a person like this for around 3 hours and still bring them back to life. This is something they use to deal with injuries that would normally result in death. It allows doctors to do the needed surgery and then bring them back to life. So, not something you want to try for fun, though, I guess. This is Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio. Okay. Many people this week have asked me about the FTX crypto market. Obviously, the entire crypto market has gone through a bashing in the last half a year. But FTX, one of the largest crypto trading companies, valued at one point at $32 billion, has filed for bankruptcy. But the question is, we all knew the cryptos are volatile, but still, how could this happen to a company like this? They had huge superstars endorsing them. They own the right to a major basketball stadium. Who was watching the company, and could they not see what was happening? Actually, this is a really good question in which many people are trying to figure it out now. Someone explained it like this. Really smart man owned a bank. Let's call him Sam. He's good at banking, but really bad at poker. But he bought his way into a poker game made up of money, crypto. But then he lost all his money at the game. So he robbed his own bank to pay the debt. But then all his depositors at the bank heard about this, and so they rushed to the bank to get their money, but unfortunately the money was already gone. This is what we have been talking about on the show before. Crypto is not a tangible commodity. It is not a real currency. It's an idea of value. Now, this guy, Sam Bankman-Fried, the CEO of FTX, he had two separate companies, a hedge fund and a crypto exchange. The exchange was called FTX, which was simply a place where you could go and exchange digital cryptocurrency. But the thing was that FTX was also creating its own digital currency called FTT, which is like just printing money out of thin air. Like I said, its value is based on hype more than anything else. Nothing of intrinsic value. But they would print the money and then give it to the hedge fund called Alameda. So when investors checked the fund, it was always full of cash. Digital cash. Crypto cash. It was like a giant crypto Ponzi scheme. You take money from the depositor and you put it in the accounts of another depositor, and when they invest more, you pay back the first depositor. But the problem was the price of crypto went down. And the FTX people found out that their money was being used to prop up another company. So they made a run for the bank all at the same time. And well, this is where Ponzi schemes fall apart. If the secret gets out, if the people at the back of the line are going to lose their money, so everyone rushes to the bank all at once, and boom, there's not enough money. The hedge fund Alameda told investors it was going to make huge returns based on the crypto market, which made people like Sam a billionaire. But due to the economy, inflation, etc., the price of the market around the world sank and pulled the value of crypto along with it. These guys made promises, high returns with zero risk, but all the profits were being propped up in the currency with this currency exchange company. Remember that currency they produced, FTT? Well, it was $80 a token at one point. However, today it's valued at $1.50. Basically, without the hype, there's no value. And currently, there is around 300 million FTT tokens. It's in circulation now. And remember, this is imaginary money. And this imaginary money is what they use as collateral to take out these loans to shore up the Alameda hedge fund. The problem was always that if FTT lost its value, how would Alameda pay its loans back? I mean, they thought it might lose some value, but not all its value. Well, FTT lost almost all its value. And much of the money that Alameda had on the books was FTT tokens. Once that word got out, like I said, boom. And then remember, when Binance was going to buy them, but then didn't because the finance were a total mess, well, they dumped all their FTT, and that sent the value spinning into free fall, and there you go. But still, this is not the end of the story. When the new CEO came in to see if he could figure out how this could happen to a company worth $32 billion, which was one day, and then zero or less than zero the next day, he was shocked at what he found. He said in his entire career, he had never seen such a complete failure of corporate controls and such a complete absence of trustworthy financial information. The concentration of control in the hands of a very small group of inexperienced, unsophisticated, and potentially compromised individuals is totally unprecedented. He had never seen this before. And this is the guy that dealt with the fall of Enron. It was like they had no idea what they were doing, yet people were giving them millions and millions of dollars. They couldn't tell where the assets were or who was controlling them or even who was allowed to control them. When it all came crashing down, they can't tell how much money the company had or even who was actually working for the company. One thing they did uncover, that was just before the crash of Alameda, the company gave Sam $1 billion in a personal loan, and some $300 million investors gave to grow the company was somehow moved to Sam's personal account. Most of the records for the company had all been deleted. There were no board meetings. Supposedly they never actually knew how much cash they had. They didn't even know where all the money was. The corporate funds of the depositors were used to buy personal real estate that was put in people's names that were in the company, mostly Sam's parents. They still can't figure out who actually worked in the company. Many of the online employees have disappeared as they didn't even know their real names. But the real issue is that the crypto is worth what people say it's worth, and what that is very different than what is real. For instance, FTX held $659 million worth of crypto. However, Sam stated that its value was $5.5 billion. He sent out the financial reports that were amazing looking, yet no one thought to really check up on whether the company was really had what they say they had. All people saw there was massive dollar signs. He was showing them not how he was able to generate, what he was able to do, how he was able to get all these numbers. No one really figured that out. So eventually, this house of cards could not stay standing. When investors really realized this is all fake, the lawsuits have been flying out. So what are they going to do now? The CEO of Alameda, Sam's girlfriend, caught a jet to Dubai, which does not have an extradition treaty with the United States. And at this point, they still don't even know where all the money is. The U.S. President Joe Biden has announced that the U.S. government is looking to put regulations to stop companies like FTX from being able to do stuff like this. Right now, investigators are looking into the books and finding there's not even a complete list of depositors. How will people ever get their money back? In reality, they probably won't, or they'll just get a small amount. One thing that really stings that this guy, Sam, seems to have known exactly what he was doing. Emails coming out now in which Sam is saying that in the email that he feels bad about screwing all the depositors, but that's just the way things go sometimes. Since all this, Sam's lawyers have dropped him because there's just no defense that they could use. I mean, it's a Ponzi scheme, plain and simple. So, in the end, is this the end of crypto? Can you trust the people pulling the strings in the crypto markets? I mean, there's no main banks. There's no regulation. It's just a bunch of young, inexperienced kids running the show. Remember in the dot-com era, people were throwing money at those companies that were just ideas. Here again, crypto is just an idea. There's nothing you can hold in your hand. The value is based entirely on what someone says it's worth. The thing you need to worry about is it all just one big lie? This is Eric Lecain here on the World News Jam on DZRJ Radio and RJ TV. We are out of time, but we will be back again next week. So please join us then. And for everybody out there, please be safe. And we will see you again from the World News Jam next week. See you then.
The views and